Somewhere east of Moscow, in a city most Americans could not find on a map, a refinery that has fed the Russian war machine for decades is on fire again. This is not a one-time hit. This is the second time in a single week that Ukrainian drones have found their way to the Ufa refinery, more than 800 miles from the front line, deep inside territory that Vladimir Putin once believed was untouchable. And while that fire burns, 3,000 miles away in Washington, officials are quietly telling one of America's closest NATO allies something that should stop all of us in our tracks. Russia may be preparing to test Poland. Not with a full invasion, not yet, but with something almost as dangerous. A provocation designed to find out whether NATO will actually fight for its own members or whether the alliance will blink. Let's start with the fires, because they tell you everything about where this war actually stands right now, no matter what either side is saying in public. For most of this war, the story was simple and brutal. Russia had the bigger army, the bigger air force, and the deeper pockets. Ukraine defended. That was the shape of things for years. But something has shifted in the last several months, and it has shifted in a way that very few people predicted even a year ago. Ukraine has built an entire industry of long-range strike drones, engineered and manufactured largely inside its own borders, and it has aimed that industry directly at the thing every modern army actually runs on: fuel. Since March, Ukraine has launched more than 50 confirmed attacks on Russian oil refineries, storage terminals, and energy facilities. This is not scattered harassment. This is a deliberate, sustained campaign, and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has started calling it something specific. He calls it a 40-day blitz. In June alone, Ukraine's military conducted long-range strikes against 11 separate Russian oil refineries, along with 8 defense industry facilities. Some of those strikes reached over 2,000 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. Let that sink in for a moment. That is roughly the distance from New York City to Denver. Ukrainian drones are flying that far into Russian territory and hitting precise industrial targets. The numbers get more staggering the closer you look. Out of Russia's top 10 oil refineries, 8 have now been struck. Only 2 remain untouched, and both of those sit far to the east, beyond the Ural Mountains, about as deep into Russia as you can get without leaving the country entirely. Facilities in Moscow and Yaroslavl have been hit multiple times since the start of the year. Analysts now estimate that roughly 1/3 of Russia's total refining capacity has been knocked offline or severely degraded. Think about what that actually means for a country the size of Russia. This is one of the largest oil-producing nations on the planet, a country that has built its entire modern economy and its entire war effort around energy. And now, because of drones built and flown by a country it invaded, Russia cannot reliably fuel its own citizens' cars. Gasoline prices inside Russia have climbed at their fastest pace in 20 years. Fuel rationing has been introduced in dozens of Russian regions, including areas that produce roughly 40% of the country's total oil output. Read that twice. Regions that pump the oil are now rationing the gasoline made from it because the refineries that would normally process it are damaged or destroyed. Moscow has grown so desperate that it has gone hat in hand to Kazakhstan, asking for an emergency shipment of 50,000 tons of gasoline just to help stabilize the domestic market. This is not some minor inconvenience for ordinary Russians standing in line at a gas station, although it is certainly that too. This is a strategic wound. Ukraine's defense minister, Mikhailo Fedorov, put it plainly. He said Russian forces are now struggling to deliver infantry to the front line and struggling even more to keep them supplied once they're there. Western military analysts largely agree. They say these strikes on fuel and supply routes behind the front have slowed Russian momentum on the battlefield in a way that direct combat alone never managed to do. The war on the ground has settled into something close to a stalemate along a front line stretching more than 600 miles, even as Russia continues to claim it is still advancing, village by village, street by street. Now here is where the story gets even more specific, because these are not random hits on random buildings. In one particularly striking case, Ukraine targeted the Kropotnya refinery, sitting inside Moscow itself, in the southeastern part of the city. Twice in June, drones got through. Think about what that represents. Moscow sits behind some of the most sophisticated air defense systems Russia possesses. Layers of radar, layers of interceptors, all built specifically to protect the capital and the Kremlin at its center. And Ukrainian drones punched through those defenses not once, but twice, and hit a refinery that had recently been modernized specifically to be more efficient. Ironically, that modernization consolidated its processing units closer together, which analysts now believe made the strikes even more damaging than they otherwise would have been. The ripple effects reach the Russian-occupied Crimean Peninsula too. Ukraine has specifically targeted fuel supplies heading toward Crimea, triggering what officials describe as the worst fuel crisis the peninsula has experienced since Russia illegally annexed it back in 2014. For over a decade, Crimea served as a symbol of Kremlin control, a place where Russia could point and say, "Look what we took and what we hold." Now it is a place running short on gas. And how has Vladimir Putin responded to all of this? Publicly, at least, he has tried to project total indifference. He has called the fuel crisis, in his own words, not critical. He has framed Ukraine's strikes as nothing more than a distraction, an attempt to draw attention away from what he insists are continued Russian advances on the battlefield. He has dismissed proposals for a mutual halt to long-range strikes deep inside each other's territory, arguing that Russian strikes into Ukraine are more powerful, more sensitive, and more destructive than anything Ukraine can do to Russia. But actions tend to speak louder than press statements, and Russia's actions this week told a very different story than Putin's words. In the early hours of this past Thursday, Russia launched one of the most devastating attacks on Kyiv since the start of the full-scale invasion more than 4 years ago. 74 missiles, 496 drones, an 11-hour barrage that tore through residential neighborhoods, collapsing apartment buildings while families slept inside them. More than 50,000 people crowded into Kyiv's subway stations, sheltering underground as explosions rocked the city above them. At least 21 civilians were killed that night, with reports suggesting the toll could climb higher as rescue crews continued digging through rubble. Russia's own defense ministry openly admitted the attack was retaliation for Ukraine's strikes on Russian oil facilities. So here is the uncomfortable truth sitting underneath all of it. Ukraine's drone campaign against Russian refineries is working well enough to genuinely hurt the Russian war machine and rattle Vladimir Putin's grip on the narrative that this war costs ordinary Russians nothing. But Russia's answer to that pain has not been to sue for peace. It has been to hit Ukrainian civilians even harder. More than 16,000 Ukrainian civilians have been killed in this war according to United Nations figures, and that number does not even begin to capture the military casualties on both sides, which independent researchers now estimate may be as high as 1.8 million killed, wounded, or missing combined, with Russian losses making up the majority of that horrifying total. Diplomacy has not gone anywhere. Recent efforts by the Trump administration to broker some kind of settlement have so far produced nothing concrete. Putin has said he is open to renewed talks, but only on the basis of the original 2022 Istanbul negotiations, which would require Ukraine to surrender the entire Donbas region, among other demands that Kyiv considers non-starters. Zelensky has offered to meet directly. Putin's response was to invite him to Moscow instead, a proposal Ukraine views as a non-starter given the obvious optics and risk involved. Meanwhile, both President Trump and President Zelensky are expected to attend a NATO summit in Turkey in the coming days, and there is a real possibility that summit becomes the next flashpoint in this entire story because of something happening 800 miles to the northwest of Kyiv in Poland. This is where the second half of this story begins, and it is in some ways even more unsettling than the fires burning across Russian refineries, because this part of the story is not about what has already happened. It is about what American intelligence believes might be coming. Multiple credible outlets, including The Telegraph and The Guardian, have reported over the past several days that the United States has repeatedly warned Poland that Russia may be planning some kind of armed provocation against Polish territory in the coming months. Sources close to Polish President Karol Nawrocki say that Washington has systematically informed Warsaw about a string of evolving Russian plans targeting NATO's eastern flank, a flank that includes Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, but which officials say could specifically include Poland this time. To be clear, and this matters enormously, none of the intelligence assessments being reported describe a full-scale Russian invasion of Poland. Analysts are explicit about this. Russia simply cannot afford a broader war right now. Its military is stretched thin across the existing front in Ukraine, its economy is straining under sanctions, and as we just covered, under a fuel crisis largely of Ukraine's own making. What officials are describing instead is something murkier and in some ways more insidious, a hybrid provocation, an action carefully designed to sit just below the threshold that would trigger a full NATO military response, while still testing exactly how far that threshold actually extends. So what would this actually look like? According to the reporting, there are several scenarios under active discussion. One involves drone strikes on Polish critical infrastructure, things like power stations, the kind of quiet, deniable attacks that can cripple daily life without technically declaring war. Another scenario involves simulated airstrikes, attacks designed specifically to force Poland to activate its air defense systems, essentially testing Poland's reflexes and its rules of engagement in real time. And then there is the most extreme scenario under discussion, one that officials say cannot be ruled out. A limited ground incursion, Russian or Belarusian troops crossing into Polish territory, potentially from the heavily militarized Russian exclave of Kaliningrad, which sits wedged between Poland and Lithuania on the Baltic coast, or from Belarus, which remains closely aligned with the Kremlin. Here is the part that should genuinely concern anyone paying attention, because it reveals just how calculated this potential provocation really is. Intelligence sources believe that if Russian or Belarusian forces did cross into Poland, the Kremlin would likely try to frame it as an accident, a GPS malfunction perhaps, or a so-called rescue mission for a downed aircraft or malfunctioning helicopter. Something plausible enough to create hesitation, something that makes Poland and its NATO allies pause and ask, is this really an attack, or is this a mistake we're about to escalate over unnecessarily? That hesitation is precisely the point, because under NATO's Article 5, an attack on one member is supposed to be treated as an attack on all. But Article 5 was designed with tanks rolling across a border in mind, not a supposedly lost helicopter crew or a drone that supposedly veered off course. Russia's entire strategy here, according to Polish and Baltic security sources, is to engineer a situation ambiguous enough that instead of Poland responding with force, the United States pushes Warsaw toward negotiation instead. And if Russian troops eventually withdrew from Polish territory as the result of talks, rather than being forced out militarily, the Kremlin could spin that outcome as a win. Proof, in Moscow's telling, that NATO does not actually have the stomach to fight for its smaller members when it counts. There is an even darker layer sitting underneath that scenario too. Sources briefed on the intelligence say Russia might attempt to blame any such provocation on Ukraine itself, muddying the waters even further and potentially driving a wedge between Warsaw and Kiev at a moment when their relationship is already strained by long-standing disputes over history and agricultural trade. Poland has been one of Ukraine's most steadfast supporters since the invasion began, hosting refugees, supplying weapons, and anchoring NATO's eastern defenses. If Moscow can find a way to make Poles doubt that support, or make them question whether continuing to back Ukraine is putting their own homeland at risk, that division becomes a weapon all on its own, no missiles required. Officials describe the underlying motive here as twofold. First, Russia wants to test NATO's actual resolve, not the resolve it talks about in press conferences, but the resolve that shows up when something genuinely difficult and ambiguous happens on Allied soil. Second, and just as important, Russia wants to use the resulting chaos and uncertainty to pressure Western nations into scaling back or suspending military and financial support for Ukraine. If the alliance looks distracted, divided, or hesitant closer to home, the logic goes, it becomes that much harder for Western publics to keep justifying billions of dollars in continued aid to a war on their eastern doorstep. It is worth pausing here to say plainly that this is intelligence reporting, not a confirmed event. Nothing has happened yet. Lithuania's own defense ministry has stated publicly that it currently sees no direct signs of a large-scale Russian military buildup aimed at the Baltic states, even as it acknowledges that the risk of sabotage and smaller provocations remains real and elevated. That distinction matters. This is not a countdown to war. It is a warning about a specific, calculated kind of gray zone aggression that falls short of open conflict by design. But NATO is not treating the warnings casually either. Officials within the alliance have publicly reaffirmed that any attack on its eastern flank would be treated as a direct attack on American troops stationed in the region, a clear signal aimed squarely at Moscow. Poland itself has recently conducted military exercises specifically preparing for these kinds of scenarios, and this entire situation is unfolding just days before that NATO summit in Turkey, scheduled for July 7th and 8th, where alliance unity, continued support for Ukraine, and the credibility of NATO's eastern defenses are all almost certain to dominate the agenda. There is also a broader pattern here that stretches beyond just Poland. Just one day before these Poland-specific warnings became public, British outlets reported that Russia's so-called Shadow Fleet, a network of aging, often unmarked tanker ships used to skirt international sanctions, has reportedly also been used to launch surveillance drones over military and nuclear sites across the United Kingdom and other parts of Europe. Intelligence officials describe this as part of an 18-month espionage campaign targeting strategic nuclear facilities across multiple European Union countries. Put simply, the concern isn't isolated to Poland. Security officials across the continent increasingly describe a pattern of Russian gray zone activity, probing, surveilling, and testing NATO's eastern and northern edges simultaneously, even while the conventional war in Ukraine continues to grind on hundreds of miles to the south. So where does all of this actually leave us? Let's step back and connect these two threads because they are not separate stories. They are two sides of the exact same coin. Ukraine's drone campaign has done something remarkable. It has taken a war that Russia spent years trying to keep comfortably distant from ordinary Russian life, a war fought by contract soldiers in faraway trenches, funded quietly through oil revenue, and it has dragged that war home, literally home, into gas stations in Moscow, into refineries that supply jet fuel to the capital's own airports, into the daily frustration of Russian citizens now waiting in line or paying sharply higher prices at the pump. That is a genuine strategic achievement for Kiev, and it is one of the clearest signs yet that despite 4 years of grinding warfare, Ukraine retains both the will and the growing technological capability to make Russia feel real consequences for continuing this war. But Vladimir Putin has made his own calculation extremely clear through his actions this week alone. He is not interested in trading concessions for relief from a fuel crisis. Instead, when Ukraine hurts him economically, his answer is to hurt Ukrainian civilians even more severely in response, betting that Western support for Kiev will eventually erode faster than Russia's own economy collapses. Analysts describe this as Putin's central wager in this entire war. That time ultimately favors him, that Western attention spans are shorter than Russian endurance, that Ukraine's resistance will eventually buckle under the sheer weight of sustained strategic bombing, even if it takes years longer than anyone in the Kremlin originally expected back in 2022. And that is precisely where Poland enters the picture, because if Putin genuinely believes Western resolve is the weak link in this entire conflict, then testing that resolve directly on NATO soil becomes an almost logical next move rather than a reckless gamble. Not a full invasion because Russia cannot currently afford one, but a provocation, a drone here, a simulated airstrike there. Maybe, in the most extreme scenario, officials are quietly preparing for a small, deniable border crossing dressed up as an accident, designed specifically to force the United States and its NATO allies into an impossible choice between forceful response and negotiated de-escalation, with Ukraine's continued Western support hanging somewhere in the balance either way. Whether that scenario actually materializes remains genuinely uncertain, and it is worth repeating that multiple sources describe this as a matter of months, not days, and Lithuanian officials themselves urge caution against assuming an imminent large-scale attack. But the fact that the United States felt it necessary to issue repeated, specific warnings to Warsaw, and that those warnings are now being openly reported across major Western outlets just days before a critical NATO summit, tells you that officials on both sides of the Atlantic consider this risk to be real, current, and worth preparing for right now, rather than later. The fires burning across Russian oil refineries and the quiet warnings passing between Washington and Warsaw are, in the end, telling the exact same underlying story. This war has never truly been contained to the borders of Ukraine. It reaches into Moscow's own gas stations. It reaches into Kaliningrad's military installations. It potentially reaches into farmland along Poland's eastern border, and quite possibly into the airspace above nuclear facilities scattered across the rest of Europe. What happens in the coming weeks, both on Russian soil and along NATO's eastern edge, may end up shaping the direction of this war and the stability of an entire continent, far more decisively than another few miles gained or lost somewhere along the 600-mile front line itself. We will be watching every one of these threads closely as they continue to develop, and we will keep bringing you clear, carefully sourced updates as this situation evolves in the days and weeks ahead.